Welcome to the Happy Mindset, episode 104. Today's episode is called Problem Solving. Today I am going to just talk about problem solving, the importance of becoming a better problem solver. This is something that I have paid a lot of value on. I've learned to place a lot of value on. Growing up, I didn't place as much value on problem solving, just the capacity to actually deal with life's problems and to create solutions. So when I didn't place a lot of value on problem solving, I had a tendency to get stuck in the problem, or I had a tendency to ignore the problem. And I'd also have a tendency to try and paint a reality that wasn't real. So painting a reality that isn't real, what that looks like in action is me seeking out resources where they're telling me things that I want to hear. I didn't want to hear the reality behind actually achieving things in the world, what that actually looks like. I wanted to believe that there was a perfect place I could get to where I wouldn't have to deal with life's problems and that everything would come easy. So over the years, I've learned that that is a delusion. It's a delusional state of mind that isn't real. It doesn't last in the long term. It might feel like it lasts for a little bit of time, but it's only ever something that exists in the short term. And it's harder to actually learn the lesson the longer that this goes on, the longer that the delusion stays in place. So I've learned from experience that it's a much better and more mentally healthy approach to acknowledge that problems exist in the world. When you do that, that level of resistance that you might have to problems in your life, it dissolves, it dissipates a bit because you're not resisting it as much. You accepted that problems exist. Now the question becomes a matter of what problems are worth solving. That's in alignment with reality. And that isn't actually a bad thing. And where the magic starts here is that when you start getting clear on what matters to you in your life, that's where the problems worth solving will start to emerge and start to appear. So this is something that is helpful in your personal life, like when it comes to the relationships you want in your life, the things you want to be doing in your spare time. This state of mind, this mindset is helpful. It's also helpful in subjects. I'll start with philosophy here. So this mindset, this acceptance that problems exist in the world, and this focus on reality, this focus on practical day-to-day living, this can help you to not get bogged into the weeds, the syntax and the semantics of a subject. Like when you're talking about philosophy, psychology, these types of areas, what you'll tend to notice in people is a focus on the wrong thing, a focus on the semantics. Like even with psychology, you'll hear people when they talk about habits, and they'll get caught up in the syntax of whether the word good or bad is useful to use. I think that's something it's a useful thought, it's a useful thing to think through, but not to dwell on that much. Don't focus a lot of time and energy on the syntax and the semantics. They'll start to unveil themselves as you take action on things. I found that through doing my podcast, that the words that I use, they just naturally evolve as I evolve with the podcast and how my perception changes. So my perception changes as my world changes. So that's the thing with philosophy, psychology, these areas. Don't get so bogged into the syntax and the semantics, and just read it and look for the meaning behind what they're trying to convey. And oftentimes that will be filtered by what's relevant to you in your life right now. And that's the best approach. Like if you're in a situation right now and you're looking for answers around a very certain specific situation, if you read philosophy or psychology, there'll be something in that. There'll be a general wisdom, a general principle that you can apply to your life right now. So taking this practically into writing, a big block I would have had starting off as a blogger years ago. 2015 was the first blog I wrote. Well, actually the first blog I wrote was 2010 when I talked about Fluent in 6 months. That was the first project I had. I kind of blocked that out of my mind for years because it was quite a traumatic experience because it happened around the same time as psychosis for me. So it was something that I had a lot of shame and embarrassment about. I just wanted to block that out of my mind. But that was my first venture into writing. That was in 2010. I was a teaching assistant in France. I had a lot of spare time in my hands, so I wanted to use it productively. and I started a blog. I wanted to learn Spanish and Italian, and I found writing was a good way for me to write down what I was learning and also teach people at the same time. That's the same approach, the same mindset I carry today. So I did learn from that experience. I did carry forward a lot of lessons, both good and bad, but there were some good lessons there too. Like, I was coming from a good state of mind back then. When it came to the intention behind it, it was just like I kind of got lost in myself. It became a lot more personal than it needed to be. So a big block I had was around the perception of the audience. It was the, what will people think of me? That was a big block there. So from reading philosophy, a bit of Stoicism, a bit of Marcus Aurelius, after a while it started dawning on me, it's like, maybe it's the meaning, maybe it's me, maybe it's my meaning that I'm attaching to this. Maybe that's what's blocking me here. Maybe it's not the people reading it or the potential audience. Maybe it's me, maybe it's the interpretation that I have of that. So there's no specific answers to that. That's the great thing about philosophy, is that it's from acting on it that that the answers start to reveal themselves. So when I started entertaining those thoughts, it was a lot easier for me to just put the blog posts online, publish them. I still had like nervousness and anxiety about putting blog posts out there, especially when I was like speaking. My intention was to speak more from the heart as I move forward, and that's quite a vulnerable thing to do. But that also leads into meaningful work. That's the flip side of that. If you're feeling right now that there's a numbness to your life, there's a lack of meaning, a lack of purpose, lack of direction, it's a good chance you're not willing to venture into your heart more and speaking things out from the heart. That's quite a vulnerable thing to do, but on the flip side, you get a lot of meaning and purpose and clarity from doing that. So that's the light to the potential darkness that you have to go through. So that's philosophy, psychology. I'm also going to apply this to just another hard skill, like more of a hard skill where it's more measurable. Programming, computer programming is a big one for problem solving. Not a lot of people as beginners actually focus on problem solving because it's not very clear how do you go about becoming a better problem solver. It's a lot clearer to like focus on syntax and semantics in programming and to focus on who's got the right concept and who hasn't. But it's a lot more nuanced to look at the problem solving, and that's actually the important part that I've discovered over time. I've learned this first from languages, so it's not like I've learned this like from doing 2 or 3 years of programming. It's that I learned it first with languages. So I learned French in university, went to France as a teaching assistant to improve my French. I learned Spanish and Italian there. When I learned Spanish and Italian, my approach changed to how I learned French. I became a language hacker. So I was looking at the important stuff to the language, and that requires a deeper level of thought than just taking in things and memorizing them, because you can do that. I did that with French for a long time. I learned the grammar rules, I learned vocabulary, I did well in my tests, my exams, I was a good student. And I went to France and I couldn't speak. Like, I had all the things in my head, all the structure, all the glue, but I had no real time practice with French. So with Spanish and Italian, I realized that I don't need to go through that whole process again. I can get to the deep stuff now quicker because I've seen it through French. So when I did that, I just started watching native stuff straight away. I started diving in at the deep end. I didn't go through that beginner, intermediate, advanced thing. I probably had to go through that in my first language because I didn't have a feel for a language. So I wouldn't have been able to like learn Spanish and Italian the way I did without going through learning French the conventional way first. Once you go through it the conventional way, you start sifting, what is it in the Bible? The wheat from the shaft? I think that's in the Bible, is it? But you start seeing, basically that just means you start seeing the important stuff from the non-important stuff, the essential stuff from the non-essential stuff. This is how you become a better critical thinker and problem solver. And so with programming, come back to programming, because I had that baseline in foreign languages, I realized that it's the problem solving, it's the thinking through things that's actually more important than the syntax and semantics. So what this will look like if you're not aware of this, the syntax and semantics can sound very intimidating. So when you enter into a new field, like I did with computer programming, if I hear people talking in jargon, it's very inaccessible to me. It makes it seem like the learning curve is a lot steeper than it actually is. It makes the whole thing seem a lot more complex than it actually is too. Like, I'm not arguing that computer science and programming isn't complex. It is complex. It's actually a bit of a paradox that in order to simplify things, you need to understand complexity. But once you start getting a grasp of what complexity is, a lot of like simplifying complexity is sifting through the stuff that's non-essential. And it's getting to that 80-20 principle. You start seeing there's a good 20% of stuff here that's essential, and sometimes it looks very, very ordinary. Like in computer programming, looking at the fundamentals, like the for loops, the if-else statements, print statements, the return statements, just focusing on that, getting a good grasp of what these things are, what are these essential things. Then when you get into a position where you can do it every day as a professional, you'll learn the nuances, you'll learn the different things day by day. There's a lot of complexity there. The best approach then for complexity is a long-term approach where you're chunking it just day by day, you're learning a little bit more. And then after a while you realize how much you know because you've been doing a long-term process. You're focused on the process. So that's why problem solving is a lot better to focus on than syntax and semantics. Another thing people drift into with syntax and semantics is with computer programming, they'll focus on the language, the frameworks. So their questions will be more focused around what framework should I learn? What language should I learn? These are the types of questions that will be asked. Whereas the real question is, what language do I want to learn? For what purpose? And then looking at it from a lens of what is the skill set I'm learning here? It's problem solving. When you become a better problem solver and you understand the logic of the language, what a framework is, like these are the types of questions you want to be asking yourself. What is a framework? What is this language? Why was it created? What's the purpose of this language? These are the questions that will help you to understand the purpose of what you're doing. And when you understand the purpose of what you're doing, it's a lot easier to transition between languages then. Like you'll learn the framework and the language that's popular if you need to. If that's what the market demands and dictates, you'll be able to shift to the other language quicker because you understand the purpose of what you're doing. You understand the actual skill sets you're learning. So that will be my insights into problem solving across I see it play out in a lot of different fields that I'm in. It's a fundamental focus on the deep stuff, the problem solving ability, rather than being lost in the syntax and semantics. And come back to linguistics again, that's something that's talked about a lot in linguistics, syntax, semantics. And I feel it's something that's focused on way too much in languages, the syntax and semantics, the grammar, getting it perfectly right, but then not being able to have a real-time conversation with another person in another language. Like that's a block I see in a lot of people. And even coming back to the education system again, I guess I need to have some sort of comparison here. But it makes no sense to me that you spend 5 years in school learning a language and yet you can't interact properly in the real world. Like, why do we spend 5 years learning a language and off the back of it maybe even get an A or a B in a test and still not be able to communicate in the real world? Like, there's something wrong there that I find. And it's a wrong mindset. It's not a learning experience. It's memorization. It's rote learning. That's what it is. But you don't need to have that approach as an adult. Like, that's the thing. You probably have understood this before. And that's something that I try and cement in myself, because when you go through a system that you're immersed in, year out, day after day, it becomes how you see the world. It becomes so deeply ingrained in you that it takes a while to actually, you have to go through a lot of repetition as well to come out the other side and see the world in a different way, to see education in a different way, to see learning in a different way. It's like it takes a lot of repetition again off the back of that, to deeply ingrain a new perspective on learning and education. that's more empowering and that actually has more real world results. So the shift again is from the syntax and semantics and the surface level stuff to more the deeper stuff, the problem solving abilities, and change, real change in your life. Coming back to philosophical debates, like arguing with somebody whether the word good or bad habit, the words good or bad habits, are the best way to go about this, isn't the best use of your time in the long run. It's good to have a healthy debate about it every now and again, but if that's the primary focus, then not much is going to change in your life, and it's just going to be wasted energy and time. So that's problem solving. That's what I wanted to talk about today. It's a big part of self-education, and it's well worth the time and effort. It's difficult. It's difficult to focus on problem solving. It's not very clear cut, and I feel it's very individual. But just having a conversation, just sharing some thoughts and ideas around this can help you. I'm hoping that this will help you. This has helped me anyway, to just separate the wheat from the shaft and see, get the balance right more often than not. So that's it for today. Thanks again for listening, and I will speak to you on the next episode.